The autumn of 1999 arrived in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, with the kind of quiet beauty that made people forget how quickly everything could change. Maple trees lined Oakwood Street in perfect rows, their leaves burning orange and red against a sky that seemed too blue to hold any secrets. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names, where front doors stayed unlocked until dinner time, and where children walked home from school without a second thought. Sarah Mitchell was 13 years old that October, caught in that awkward space between childhood and whatever came next. She wore her blonde hair in a ponytail that swung when she walked, and she had a habit of humming songs under her breath, usually whatever was playing on the radio that week. Her brother Danny was 2 years younger, and on most days they walked the 8 blocks from Jefferson Middle School together, arguing about nothing important, racing each other past Mrs. Henderson's garden where the roses still bloomed despite the cooling weather. But on October 14th, 1999, Danny had detention. He'd been caught passing notes in Mr. Carmichael's history class, something stupid about the weekend's football game, and the punishment was 30 minutes after school. Sarah had rolled her eyes when he told her at lunch, her green eyes reflecting equal parts annoyance and amusement. "You're such an idiot," she'd said, stealing a French fry from his tray. "I'm not waiting around, I'll just walk home." "It's only 30 minutes, Danny protested. "Come on, Sarah, you can wait in the library." "And Miss Dawson's Creek? No way." She grinned at him, that crooked smile that always made one corner of her mouth lift higher than the other. "I'll see you at home, loser." Those were the last words Danny Mitchell ever said to his sister while she was still just Sarah, still just his annoying older sister who stole his fries and hogged the TV remote. The last moment before everything fractured into before and after. The school bell rang at 3:15, the same as it did every day, sending a flood of students pouring out onto the sidewalk. Sarah walked out with her best friend, Amanda Chen, both girls loaded down with backpacks and talking about the algebra homework they'd barely understood. Security cameras at the school's main entrance caught them at 3:18 p.m. Sarah in her denim jacket and blue jeans, Amanda in her field hockey uniform. "You sure you don't want to come over?" Amanda asked as they reached the corner where they usually split up. "My mom's making those chocolate chip cookies you like." Sarah hesitated. The footage would later show that pause, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, considering. "I can't. I told my mom I'd be home right after school. She's got that thing tonight, the PTA meeting or whatever." "Boring," Amanda sang, but she was smiling. "Okay, see you tomorrow. Don't forget we have that science project due Friday." They hugged quickly, the casual embrace of girls who'd known each other since elementary school, and then Amanda headed east toward Birch Street while Sarah turned west toward home. 3 neighbors later reported seeing her on that walk. Mr. Peterson, who was raking leaves in his front yard, waved at her as she passed at approximately 3:25 p.m. She'd waved back, he told police, nothing unusual about her at all. Mrs. Kowalski saw her from her kitchen window around 3:28, recognized the denim jacket Sarah always wore. And Tommy Bradford, a high school senior who lived 2 houses down from the Mitchells, was washing his car in the driveway and specifically remembered her walking past because she'd made a joke about him missing a spot. He checked his watch afterward because he had to pick up his girlfriend at 4. It was 3:32 p.m. Sarah's house was at 847 Oakwood Street, a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. The distance from where Tommy saw her to her front door was exactly 420 feet. The walk should have taken less than 2 minutes. She never arrived. At 4:45 p.m., Carol Mitchell called Jefferson Middle School, asking if Sarah had stayed late for some activity she'd forgotten to mention. The secretary checked, no after-school programs that day, and Sarah hadn't signed in anywhere. Carol called Amanda's house next. Amanda confirmed they'd split up at the corner over an hour ago. That's when the first cold finger of fear traced down Carol's spine. By 5:30 p.m., Peter Mitchell had driven every street in a 6-block radius, calling Sarah's name out the window of his Honda Accord, checking behind houses and in yards where she might have stopped to pet a dog or talk to a friend. Carol had called every parent she could think of, her voice climbing higher with each dead end. Danny sat on the front steps, detention forgotten, staring at the sidewalk as if he could make his sister materialize through sheer force of will. At 6:15 p.m., Peter called the police. The first officers arrived 16 minutes later, and that's when the Mitchells learned how quickly a normal day could transform into a nightmare. Within an hour, there were 4 patrol cars on Oakwood Street. By 9 p.m., search teams were combing through backyards with flashlights, and a command center had been established at the local fire station. The FBI was contacted. Cases involving missing children, especially those that might involve abduction, fell under federal jurisdiction. Detective Robert Chen arrived at the Mitchell house just after 10 p.m. He was Amanda's uncle, which made the whole thing feel surreal and personal in a way that added to the horror. Bob Chen had known Sarah since she was in kindergarten, had watched her grow up at birthday parties and school functions. Now he sat across from Carol and Peter in their living room, a tape recorder on the coffee table between them, asking questions that felt like violations. Did Sarah seem upset about anything recently? Any changes in behavior, new friends, anything unusual? Carol shook her head, tears streaming silently down her face. She was normal, completely normal. She was happy. She made honor roll last marking period. She was excited about Halloween, planning her costume with Amanda. Any disputes with classmates? Anyone who might have bothered her? No, nothing like that. Everyone loved Sarah. She was. Peter's voice broke. He cleared his throat, tried again. She was a good kid. Sweet. She wasn't in any trouble. Bob wrote notes, his face carefully neutral. Professional. But Danny, watching from the stairs where he'd been told to wait, could see the muscle jumping in the detective's jaw. He was terrified too, Danny realized. They all were. The neighborhood search continued through the night. Volunteers showed up, parents from school, teachers, people who'd seen the news. They walked shoulder to shoulder through the park, the woods behind the elementary school, anywhere a girl might be, lost or hurt or hiding. They found nothing. By sunrise, Sarah Mitchell had been missing for 15 hours. Her face was already on the local news, a school photo from last year where she smiled at the camera with that crooked grin. Tips started coming in. A girl matching her description seen at a gas station 20 miles away. A suspicious van reported near the school. A neighbor who thought maybe he'd heard shouting around 3:30. Every lead was followed. None of them led anywhere. The first 48 hours were critical in missing persons cases, everyone said. After that, the statistics got grim. But the Mitchells refused to think about statistics. Sarah was coming home. She had to come home. Danny's detention, those 30 stupid minutes that had separated him from his sister, became the axis around which his entire life would rotate. If he'd just walked with her, if he'd just waited, if he hadn't been passing notes in history class like an idiot. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe properly. On the third day, the FBI brought in cadaver dogs. They searched the woods, the creek, the abandoned factory on the edge of town. The dogs found nothing, which should have been relief, but somehow felt worse. Like Sarah had simply evaporated, stepped out of reality somewhere between Tommy Bradford's driveway and her own front door. Theories multiplied like bacteria. A stranger abduction, someone driving through town who'd seen a lone girl and made a split-second decision. A predator who'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. A runaway scenario, though everyone who knew Sarah dismissed that immediately. She wasn't running from anything. She had no reason to disappear. Detective Chen focused on a white utility van that several people reported seeing in the neighborhood that afternoon. Nobody had gotten a plate number. The description was too vague. White, maybe with some kind of logo on the side. Possibly a plumbing company or electrician. In 1999, before doorbell cameras and smartphones, that was all they had to work with. The van became a ghost, simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Weeks became months. The search area expanded to neighboring counties, then neighboring states. Sarah's face appeared on milk cartons, on billboards, on the emerging internet where early true crime forums dissected every detail of her disappearance. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. Psychics called with visions. None of it helped. The Mitchells' house became a mausoleum of waiting. Carol couldn't bring herself to change anything in Sarah's room. The clothes still in the closet, the bed still made, the Backstreet Boys poster still on the wall. Peter threw himself into the search with manic energy, printing flyers, organizing volunteer search parties, calling the police station daily for updates. And Danny. Danny grew up in the shadow of his missing sister, shaped by her absence the way a tree grows around a wound. He walked home from school alone now, always taking the exact route Sarah had taken that day, as if retracing her steps might somehow reveal what had happened to her. He studied the sidewalk, the houses, the places where someone could have grabbed her, or she could have accepted a ride. He became obsessed with the van, with the timeline, with the impossible question of how someone could vanish in broad daylight on a quiet suburban street. By the time he entered high school, Danny Mitchell was known as that kid whose sister disappeared. It became his identity, the thing that set him apart. Other kids were careful around him, unsure what to say. He had few friends. He didn't date. His life had paused on October 14, 1999, and couldn't seem to restart. Detective Chen retired in 2005, the case still unsolved. He'd worked it for 6 years, followed hundreds of leads, interviewed thousands of people. At his retirement party, he pulled Danny aside, 17 years old by then, tall and serious and carrying weight no teenager should have to bear. "I'm sorry," Chen said simply. "I'm sorry I couldn't bring her home." Danny nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Another door closing, another person giving up. But Danny never gave up. He couldn't. Late at night, when his parents were asleep, he pored over the case files Chen had unofficially shared with him over the years. He memorized every detail, every witness statement, every theory. He joined online forums dedicated to cold cases, contributing what he knew about Sarah's disappearance, reading about other missing persons, looking for patterns or connections that the police might have missed. The years accumulated. 2000 became 2005, became 2010. The anniversaries of Sarah's disappearance became smaller. A brief mention in the local paper, a post on a true crime blog. People moved on. Life moved on. The Mitchells tried to move on, though grief had fundamentally altered them, like a familiar house after a fire. The structure remained, but everything inside was charred and wrong. Danny was 26 years old in October 2014, working as a data analyst for an insurance company in Pittsburgh, still living in Pennsylvania, still unable to leave the place where he'd last seen his sister. He lived alone in a modest apartment, his walls covered with maps and timelines and photographs, his own private investigation that had yielded nothing but consumed his life anyway. 15 years. Sarah had been gone for 15 years. She would be 28 now if she was alive. Danny tried not to think about the statistics, about what happened to missing girls, about the likelihood that she died on that October day and her body had simply never been found. He tried to hold on to hope, even as it grew more fragile with each passing year. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, 2 weeks before the 15th anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, Danny was working from home, staring at spreadsheets and fighting off the headache that always came when he'd been looking at numbers too long. His cell phone rang, a number he didn't recognize, which usually meant spam or telemarketing. He almost didn't answer. His finger hovered over the decline button, but some instinct made him swipe to accept instead. "Hello? Hi, is this Daniel Mitchell?" A chipper female voice. Definitely a telemarketer reading from a script. "I'm calling from Superior Home Services regarding an exciting opportunity to..." Danny was already pulling the phone away from his ear, ready to hang up, when he heard it. In the background, behind the telemarketer's pitch, there was laughter. A woman laughing at something someone had said, the sound slightly muffled like it was coming from another room or another desk in a call center. It was a distinctive laugh, the kind that started high and then broke partway through, becoming almost a hiccup before recovering. Danny's entire world stopped. He knew that laugh. He knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat, the way he knew the exact layout of his childhood home in the dark. He'd heard it 10,000 times, in 10,000 memories that had played on loop in his mind for 15 years. It was Sarah's laugh. His hand started shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. "Wait," he said, cutting off the telemarketer mid-sentence. "Wait, who was that? Who just laughed?" "I'm sorry, sir." The telemarketer sounded confused, thrown off her script. "I'm calling about the woman who just laughed in the background. Who is she? I need to know who she is." "Sir, I don't understand. Please." Danny's voice cracked. "Please, this is important. The woman who laughed just now, what's her name? Where are you calling from?" There was a pause, muffled conversation on the other end. Then a male voice came on, deeper, authoritative. "Sir, this is a supervisor. Is there a problem?" No problem. There was a woman laughing in the background. I need to know who she is. It's extremely important. It's..." How did he explain this without sounding insane? "It's a family matter, please. I'm not authorized to give out information about our employees, sir. Now, if you're not interested in our services, what city are you in? At least tell me that. Where is your call center located?" Another pause. "We're based in Millfield, West Virginia, sir. But I really can't." Danny hung up. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard it hurt. Millfield, West Virginia. He pulled up his laptop with shaking hands and searched for the town. Population 15,000. Rural, approximately 4 hours from Pittsburgh. He'd never heard of it. It couldn't be her. The rational part of his brain knew that. 15 years. A random laugh in the background of a telemarketing call. It was impossible. It was his obsession playing tricks on him, his desperate mind manufacturing connections that didn't exist. But he knew that laugh. God help him. He knew it. Danny stared at his screen, at the map of West Virginia, at the tiny dot marking Millfield. Somewhere in that town, maybe, possibly, impossibly, was the voice that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. He had to find out, even if it destroyed him, even if it was nothing. He had to know. Danny didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, 3 cups of cold coffee, and a notebook filling up with increasingly frantic handwriting. Superior Home Services, Millfield, West Virginia. A woman's laugh that had triggered something primal in his memory, something beyond rational thought. He started with the company itself. Their website was basic. Generic stock photos of smiling people in headsets, vague promises about quality home improvement solutions, and customer satisfaction guaranteed. The contact page listed a single phone number and an address, 1847 Industrial Park Road, Millfield, WV. No employee directory, no staff photos, nothing useful. By 3 a.m., Danny had found the company's business registration, tax records, and a handful of online reviews complaining about aggressive sales tactics. Superior Home Services had been operating for 8 years, primarily selling home security systems and solar panels through cold calls. It was legitimate, or at least legal, which somehow made everything more complicated. If this was where Sarah worked, if that impossible if had any truth to it, she wasn't being held in some obvious criminal operation. She was working a normal job, living what appeared to be a normal life. Unless she didn't know. Unless she didn't remember. The thought had been circling Danny's mind since the moment he heard that laugh. What if Sarah had been taken by someone who'd convinced her she belonged to them? What if she'd been so young that her memories had been rewritten, replaced with a different childhood, a different family? He'd read about cases like that. Children abducted and raised by their kidnappers, growing up believing lies until the truth eventually surfaced. But 15 years. Could someone really forget their entire life for 15 years? When dawn finally came, gray and cold through his apartment windows, Danny made a decision. He called in sick to work, something he never did, and started packing a bag. He had no plan beyond driving to Millfield and trying to figure out which employee at Superior Home Services had that laugh. It was insane. It was desperate. It was all he had. Before leaving, he made one more call. Detective Robert Chen had been retired for nearly a decade, but Danny had kept in touch over the years. Chen answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Danny, it's 6 in the morning. What's wrong? I heard her, Bob. Danny's voice was steady despite the trembling in his hands. I heard Sarah on a phone call yesterday. I know how it sounds, but I heard her laugh and I know it was her. There was a long silence. Then Chen sighed, the sound heavy with a decade of disappointing dead ends and false hopes. Danny, listen to me. I know you want to find her. God knows I do too. But you can't chase every coincidence, every girl who looks or sounds a little like. It wasn't a coincidence. It was her laugh, Bob. That specific way it breaks in the middle. I know it. Where was this call from? A telemarketing company in Millfield, West Virginia. Superior Home Services. I'm driving down there today. Danny, no, you can't just... Chen stopped himself, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something more careful. If you really think you heard something, let me make some calls. I still have contacts. We can look into this properly through official channels. That could take weeks. What if she's there? What if I'm right and we wait too long and she disappears again? And what if you're wrong? What if you drive down there, make a scene, and it turns out to be some random woman who happens to laugh like your sister did when she was 13? You'll get yourself in trouble, maybe arrested for harassment. And for what? Danny closed his eyes, pressing his fingers against his temples where a headache was building. I have to go. I have to at least try. You understand that, don't you? Another silence, longer this time. Chen had daughters of his own, had spent 6 years of his career trying to bring Sarah home. He understood obsession and desperation better than most. Give me the address, Chen said finally, and promise me you won't do anything stupid. Just observe. Take photos if you can, but don't approach anyone. Don't make accusations. If there's really something there, we need to handle it carefully. Can you do that? Yes. Danny lied. The drive to Millfield took 4.5 hours through increasingly rural Pennsylvania and West Virginia landscape. Mountains rose around the highway, covered in forests that were losing their leaves to November's approach. Danny drove on autopilot, his mind cycling through the same questions on an endless loop. What would he say if he saw her? Would she recognize him? Would he even recognize her after 15 years? He'd brought photos, of course. His phone was full of them. Sarah at 13, her school picture, candid shots from family vacations and holidays. He'd also brought an age progression image that a forensic artist had created 5 years after her disappearance, showing what Sarah might look like at 18. But that was dated now, too. She'd be 28. Would she still have that crooked smile? That way of tilting her head when she was listening? Millfield appeared gradually as the highway descended into a valley. A small town built around what looked like old mining operations, now converted into warehouses and light industry. The downtown was compact, just a few blocks of brick buildings housing a diner, a hardware store, a dollar store, and a pizza place. American flags hung from lamp posts. A banner stretched across Main Street advertised the upcoming Harvest Festival. It looked like 1,000 other small American towns. Quiet. Normal. The kind of place where nothing interesting ever happened. Industrial Park Road was on the outskirts, a strip of metal buildings and parking lots. Number 1847 was a low, beige structure that could have been anything. A warehouse, a factory, an office complex. A modest sign near the entrance read, Superior Home Services, in blue letters. The parking lot held about 30 cars, including a white van with the company logo on the side. Danny parked across the street in the lot of what appeared to be an abandoned grocery store. From there, he had a clear view of Superior Home Services' main entrance. He checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. He had no idea what the call center's hours were, when shifts changed, or how he'd even identify the woman he was looking for. He only knew he couldn't leave until he tried. The first hour passed slowly. A few people came and went. A delivery driver, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase, a woman in scrubs who seemed to be on her lunch break. None of them were right. Danny watched through his windshield, his camera ready, feeling more foolish with each passing minute. At 4:15 p.m., the main entrance opened and a group of people emerged. The day shift ending, maybe. 8 or 9 people talking and laughing, heading toward their cars. Danny's heart rate spiked. He raised his camera, zooming in on their faces. Too old. Wrong hair. Too tall. Wrong everything. Then at the back of the group, walking alone toward a blue Honda Civic, he saw her. The world tilted. She had Sarah's blonde hair, though it was darker now, pulled back in a low ponytail. Sarah's height and build, though filled out with 15 years of living. Sarah's way of walking with that slight bounce in her step. She wore jeans and a purple sweater, a purse slung over one shoulder, and she was looking down at her phone as she walked. Danny couldn't breathe. He zoomed in with the camera, his hands shaking so badly the image blurred. He took photo after photo, hoping at least one would be clear enough. She reached her car, unlocked it, paused to say something to a coworker passing by, and when she smiled, Danny's entire chest constricted. That smile, that same crooked smile that lifted one corner higher than the other, it was her. After 15 years of searching, of hoping, of dying slowly inside, he'd found her. The Honda backed out of its parking space and headed toward the exit. Danny's training in rational thought, in data analysis and careful decision-making, evaporated completely. He started his car and followed. She drove through Millfield at exactly the speed limit, stopping carefully at stop signs, signaling every turn. Normal, law-abiding. She turned onto a residential street called Maple Ridge Drive, lined with modest houses that all looked like they'd been built in the 1970s. Halfway down the block, she pulled into the driveway of a small ranch house with tan siding and white trim. Danny parked 3 houses down, trying to appear casual while his heart threatened to explode. He watched her gather her purse and a shopping bag from the passenger seat, lock her car and walk to the front door. She had keys. She let herself in like she lived there. The house looked utterly ordinary, a well-maintained lawn, flower beds along the front, though the flowers had died back for winter, a mailbox with the number 2156 in black plastic numbers, an American flag on a pole by the front steps. Danny sat there for 20 minutes, taking photos of the house, of the street, of anything that might be useful. His phone rang, Detective Chen calling back. Danny silenced it. He couldn't talk now. Couldn't explain what he was feeling, the mixture of joy and horror and confusion that made his hands shake and his vision blur with tears he wouldn't let fall. A truck pulled into the driveway next to the Honda, a red Ford F-150, newer model, with a toolbox in the bed. A man got out, late 40s maybe, weathered face, wearing work clothes and boots. He stretched as he walked toward the house, looking tired from a long day. He opened the front door without knocking and went inside. Was that him? The person who took Sarah? Or someone she lived with now, unaware of who she really was? Danny's phone buzzed with a text from Chen. "Call me. Now. Don't do anything yet." But Danny was already getting out of his car. He crossed the street, his legs moving independently of his brain's rapidly fraying commands for caution. He walked up the driveway, past the 2 vehicles, to the front door. His finger pressed the doorbell before he could stop himself. Footsteps inside. The door opened. It was her, close enough to touch. Close enough to see the light freckles across her nose that he remembered from childhood, the exact shade of green in her eyes, the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off her bike when she was 9. "Hi," she said, smiling politely. "Can I help you?" Her voice. God, her voice was the same but different, deeper, adult, with an accent that had softened into Appalachian vowels instead of Pennsylvania precision. Danny opened his mouth, but nothing came out. All the speeches he'd prepared, all the careful questions he'd planned dissolved into white noise. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern replacing the polite smile. "Sir?" "Sarah," he managed finally, her name barely a whisper. Something flickered across her face, confusion maybe, or a ghost of recognition so deep she didn't consciously register it. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong house. My name's Sarah Mitchell." Danny's voice grew stronger, more certain. "You're Sarah Mitchell. You disappeared on October 14th, 1999. walking home from school in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. You were 13 years old. I'm Danny. I'm your brother." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she just stared at him, her hand gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Then she shook her head, a small, confused movement. I don't know what you're talking about. You need to leave. Sarah, please." "My name is Rachel." Her voice had gone tight, defensive. "Rachel Garrett. I don't know who Sarah is, but you have the wrong person. You need to go before I call the police." "Rachel?" The male voice came from inside the house. Heavy footsteps approached. The man Danny had seen earlier appeared behind her, his expression darkening when he saw Danny. "What's going on? Who is this?" "He's just leaving," Rachel, Sarah, said quickly. "He's confused, thinks I'm someone else." "I'm not confused." Danny pulled out his phone with shaking hands, found the photo of Sarah at 13, held it up. "Look at this. Please, just look at it." She looked. He saw the exact moment something shifted behind her eyes, some deep recognition that she immediately tried to suppress. Her hand came up to her mouth, pressing against her lips. "Rachel, get inside," the man said, his voice hard. He moved forward, putting himself between Danny and the woman who might be Sarah. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, buddy, but you need to get off my property right now." "I just want to talk to her, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "She doesn't want to talk to you. You heard her. Now leave, or I'm calling the cops." Danny looked past him, met Sarah's, Rachel's eyes one more time. She was trembling, her face pale, one hand still pressed to her mouth. She looked terrified. Of him, of the truth, of the man standing between them. 15 years, Danny said, his voice breaking. "We've been looking for you for 15 years. Mom and Dad never gave up. I never gave up. Please, Sarah, please remember." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry, but you're wrong. You have to go." The man took a step forward, aggressive now. "Last chance, leave or I'm making you leave." Danny backed away, hands raised, his eyes still locked on the woman in the doorway. He retreated to the sidewalk, then to his car, his entire body shaking with adrenaline and heartbreak. He got in, started the engine, but didn't drive away. He couldn't. Not yet. Through his windshield, he watched the man pull Rachel back inside and slam the door. A minute later, curtains closed across the front windows. Danny sat there as the sun set, as the streetlights came on, as the sky turned from orange to purple to black. His phone kept ringing. Chen, his mother, his boss. He ignored them all. He'd found her. After 15 years, he'd found his sister. Now he just had to prove it, and figure out why she didn't remember who she was. Detective Robert Chen arrived in Millfield at 7:30 the next morning, his silver Buick pulling up beside Danny's car in the parking lot of a Comfort Inn, where Danny had finally gone after sitting outside the house until midnight. Chen looked older than Danny remembered, his hair completely gray now, deep lines around his eyes, but the expression on his face was the same one Danny had seen 15 years ago. Determined, focused, and carefully controlled. "You look like hell," Chen said as Danny climbed into the passenger seat, holding a gas station coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "I found her, Bob. I know I did." "Show me what you've got." Danny pulled up the photos on his camera. The woman leaving Superior Home Services, walking to her car. The profile shots he'd managed to capture. The one clear image of her face when she'd answered the door. Chen studied each one in silence, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "It looks like her," he admitted finally. "Or it could look like her. 15 years is a long time, people change. But Danny, even if this is Sarah, and that's a big if, you can't just show up at someone's door making accusations. You could have compromised everything last night." She recognized something. I saw it in her eyes. She looked at that photo and something clicked. Fear isn't the same as recognition. You're a strange man claiming she's someone she doesn't remember being. Of course she was scared. Chen handed the camera back. "But you're right about one thing. We need to investigate this properly. I made some calls last night, still have a few friends in the bureau. They're interested, but they need more than a hunch and some photographs. What do? We start with the man. Who is he? How does Rachel Garrett, if that's really her name, fit into his life? Marriage records, property records, employment history. We build a case before we make a move. They spent the morning at the Millfield Public Library, one of the few places with public computers and internet access that didn't require questions. Chen had connections that could access databases Danny couldn't, but they started with the basics that anyone could find. The house at 2156 Maple Ridge Drive was owned by Thomas Michael Garrett, age 49, purchased in 2003. Before that, property records showed he'd lived in Beckley, West Virginia, about 90 miles south. He worked as a contractor, had a business license for Garrett Construction Services, and had no criminal record, at least not in West Virginia. Rachel Garrett appeared in public records starting in 2005, when she was listed as a dependent on Thomas Garrett's tax returns. She would have been 19 then, but there was no birth certificate, no record of her existence before that year. Her driver's license, issued in 2008, listed her birth date as April 3, 1986, which would make her 28 now, the same age Sarah would be. But Sarah's birthday was October 22, 1986, 6 months different. "It's fake," Danny said, staring at the screen. "The whole identity is constructed. Or she was born in April and you're wrong about who she is," Chen countered, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "Keep looking. We need school records, medical records, anything that can tell us where she came from." They found Rachel Garrett's high school diploma from Millfield High School, class of 2005. But when Chen called the school's administrative office, claiming to be verifying records for a job application, the secretary couldn't find any attendance records before junior year. "Sometimes transfers don't get properly filed," the woman had explained apologetically, especially from out-of-state or homeschool situations. Homeschool. That would explain gaps in the paper trail. A child disappears in Pennsylvania, resurfaces 6 years later in West Virginia under a new name, supposedly homeschooled by her father, until high enough to enroll in public school. By then, who would question it? Who would connect a 17-year-old girl in West Virginia to a 13-year-old missing from Pennsylvania 6 years earlier? "We need DNA," Chen said. "That's the only way to know for sure. But we can't compel her to give it without probable cause, and we don't have enough for a warrant yet." "What about the original missing persons case? Don't you still have Sarah's DNA on file?" "We have her toothbrush, some hair from a brush. It's been in evidence storage for 15 years. It should still be viable for comparison, but we need something from her, from Rachel, to compare it to." Danny thought about the house, about following her to work, about the impossibility of getting close enough to collect DNA without it being illegal or creepy or both. Then he remembered something. She works at a call center. She has to touch things: phones, keyboards, door handles. What if we could get something from her workplace? Chen shook his head. That's a legal nightmare. Chain of custody issues, consent problems. Even if we got a sample that way, it might not be admissible in court. But it would tell us if I'm right. Danny, if it's not admissible in court, that means it's not illegal to collect, right? It's just not usable as evidence. But it could tell us whether we're wasting our time or whether we need to push harder for an official investigation. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the computer screen where Rachel Garrett's driver's license photo looked back at them. Finally, he sighed. "I didn't hear you say that, and I'm definitely not helping you do it. But hypothetically, if someone were to obtain a DNA sample through unofficial channels, they'd need to be very careful about not trespassing, not stealing anything, and not doing anything that could be construed as stalking or harassment." Danny nodded slowly. "Hypothetically. And they'd need a lab willing to run the comparison off the books, which is harder than it sounds. I might know someone." Danny had spent 15 years in online communities dedicated to cold cases. He'd made connections with forensic experts, retired investigators, even a few lab technicians who did freelance work. One of them, a woman named Dr. Sarah Voss, ironic name, had offered more than once to help if Danny ever found a solid lead. They parted ways in the library parking lot. Chen was driving back to Pennsylvania to personally retrieve Sarah's DNA from evidence storage and to start making unofficial inquiries about Thomas Garrett's background prior to 2000. Danny was staying in Millfield, watching, waiting, looking for an opportunity. The next 3 days were an exercise in patient surveillance. Danny learned Rachel's routine with the dedication of someone who'd spent 15 years with nothing but patience. She left for work at 8:15 every morning, arriving at Superior Home Services by 8:30. She worked until 5:00 p.m., always leaving through the main entrance with the same group of coworkers. She ate lunch in her car most days, usually something she'd brought from home. On Wednesday, she went to the grocery store after work, Danny following at a careful distance through the aisles while she filled her cart with mundane items: milk, bread, chicken, vegetables. She looked happy. That was the part that kept catching in Danny's throat. She smiled at cashiers, chatted with coworkers, seemed comfortable in her life. If she was Sarah, and every fiber of Danny's being insisted she was, she didn't appear to be suffering or trapped or desperate for rescue. She appeared to be living a normal life, unaware that it was built on a foundation of lies. Thomas Garrett was harder to track. His construction work took him to different sites around the county, and his schedule was irregular. But Danny managed to follow him twice, once to a renovation project at a church, another time to Home Depot where he loaded lumber into his truck. He seemed like any other working-class contractor, tired, focused on his job, unremarkable. Except for one thing Danny noticed. Whenever Rachel and Thomas were together, getting out of their cars in the driveway, glimpsed through windows in the evening, Thomas always seemed to position himself between Rachel and the outside world, a hand on her elbow guiding her inside, standing in doorways while she passed through, small gestures of control disguised as protectiveness. On Thursday evening, Danny's opportunity came. Rachel stopped at the Millfield Public Library after work, parking near the entrance and going inside with a canvas bag. Danny waited 5 minutes, then followed, keeping to the opposite side of the building. The library was small, just 2 rooms, one for adults, one for children. Rachel was in the adult section, browsing the mystery novels. She selected 3 books, brought them to the circulation desk, and checked them out using a library card she pulled from her purse. The whole transaction took less than 10 minutes. After she left, Danny approached the same shelf she'd been browsing. His heart was pounding. This was probably illegal, definitely unethical. But if he was right, if this was Sarah, didn't that justify everything? He pulled out his phone and called the library's main number from outside, asking for the circulation desk. When the librarian answered, the same young woman who'd checked out Rachel's books, he asked about their hours. While she was distracted explaining they closed at 8, Danny slipped on a pair of latex gloves he'd bought at a pharmacy and carefully lifted one of the books Rachel had touched but not checked out. The cover was glossy, perfect for fingerprints or skin cells. He slid it into a gallon-sized plastic bag he'd been carrying, sealed it, and left quickly before anyone could question what he was doing. Back in his hotel room, using tweezers and swabs from a DNA collection kit he'd ordered online, Danny carefully collected samples from the book's cover and edges. It wasn't perfect. Contamination was a risk, and he had no idea if there was enough genetic material present. But it was something, it was a chance. He shipped the swabs overnight to Dr. Voss in Maryland with a note explaining the situation in the vaguest terms possible. Chen had driven to Pennsylvania and back, retrieving the evidence from Sarah's case, her toothbrush and hairbrush, preserved in sealed bags for 15 years. Those went to Dr. Voss as well, with instructions for a DNA comparison. Now came the hardest part. Waiting. Danny spent Friday monitoring Rachel's movements while his mind raced through every possible outcome. What if the DNA didn't match? What if he'd been wrong, had projected his desperate need to find Sarah onto some random woman who happened to laugh a certain way? What if he'd wasted the past week chasing a ghost? But what if he was right? Dr. Voss called on Saturday morning. Her voice was carefully neutral, professional. Danny, I have results from the samples you sent. The DNA from the book you provided shows a familial relationship with the samples from the hairbrush. Not identical, that would mean same person, but close enough to indicate siblings. First-degree relatives. Danny's knees gave out. He sat down hard on the hotel bed, the phone pressed so tightly to his ear it hurt. "You're sure?" "I ran it 3 times. The markers are consistent. If the hairbrush samples came from your sister, then the woman who touched that book is her sibling, which in this context would only make sense if they're the same person at different ages. The DNA has aged, but the genetic relationship is clear." "Oh my God. Danny, this is off the books. You understand that, right? This can't be used in any official capacity, but for what it's worth, I think you found her. I think you really found her." After he hung up, Danny sat motionless for nearly 20 minutes, processing the impossible truth. Sarah was alive. She'd been alive this whole time, living 90 miles from their parents, working a normal job, going by another name, with no memory or no admission of who she really was. He called Chen, who received the news with a sharp intake of breath followed by a long silence. "Okay," the detective said finally. "Okay, this changes everything. I'm calling the FBI. This is officially an open investigation again. Possible kidnapping, identity fraud, unlawful custody of a minor. They'll want to interview Thomas Garrett, do their own DNA testing. How long will that take?" "Danny, you need to step back now. You've done your part. You found her. But from here, this has to be handled by professionals. If Garrett realizes we're onto him, he could run. Or worse." "Worse how?" Chen hesitated. "If he's kept Sarah isolated for 15 years, convinced her she's someone else, he's not going to give her up easily. Men like that, they don't let go. We have to be smart about this." But being smart meant being slow, and Danny had already waited 15 years. That night, he drove past the house on Maple Ridge Drive one more time. The lights were on, warm yellow glowing through curtains. He could see shadows moving inside. 2 people, living their evening, unaware that everything was about to change. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would tell his parents. Tomorrow, the FBI would get involved. Tomorrow, Sarah would learn the truth. But tonight, for just a few more hours, Danny let himself feel the thing he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. He pulled out his phone and looked at the last photo he'd taken of Sarah at the library. She'd been smiling at something the librarian said, that crooked smile that meant she was genuinely amused. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked like someone who had no idea her entire life was a lie. The FBI arrived in Millfield on Monday morning, 3 days after Dr. Voss confirmed the DNA match. Special Agent Jennifer Torres led the team, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an economy of movement that suggested she didn't waste time on anything unnecessary. She met with Danny and Detective Chen at the local police station, a small brick building that clearly wasn't accustomed to federal investigations. "I've reviewed the case file from 1999, Torres said, spreading papers across a conference table. "And I've reviewed everything you've collected over the past week. Mr. Mitchell, I need to be clear about something. What you did, following this woman, collecting DNA without consent, that creates complications for us legally." "But the DNA proves it's her," Danny said. "The DNA proves a familial relationship. And yes, combined with the circumstantial evidence, the timeline, the lack of records before 2005, the physical resemblance, we have probable cause. But we need to handle this carefully. If Thomas Garrett has kept your sister for 15 years, he's had 15 years to prepare for this moment. He may have contingency plans." "What kind of contingency plans?" Chen asked. Torres's expression darkened. "In cases of long-term abduction where the victim has been convinced of a false identity, the captor often has leverage. Threats about what will happen if the truth comes out. Stories about why the victim can't trust authorities. We've seen abductors convince children that their real families abandoned them, that they're wanted for crimes, that returning to their old life means prison or death. After 15 years, those lies become the victim's reality." Danny felt sick. "So what do? We approach this as a welfare check first. We have questions about Rachel Garrett's identity documentation. We'd like to speak with her and Thomas Garrett separately, voluntarily. We get DNA samples officially, run them through proper channels. If everything checks out the way we think it will, then we move forward with criminal charges against Garrett. And if he refuses to cooperate, then we get a warrant, but that takes time, and it alerts him that we're serious. I'd rather handle this quietly if possible. Torres looked directly at Danny. I need you to stay away from the house and from Rachel. No more surveillance, no more contact. If Garrett sees you hanging around, it could trigger exactly the kind of response we're trying to avoid. Danny wanted to argue, but Chen put a hand on his shoulder. She's right. We're too close now to risk it. The plan was set for Tuesday afternoon. Torres would approach the house with a local officer, presenting themselves as following up on routine questions about Rachel's employment verification, something boring and bureaucratic that wouldn't immediately raise alarms. They'd ask to speak with Rachel alone, then with Thomas separately. If everything proceeded smoothly, they'd request DNA samples and explain that there were questions about Rachel's identity that needed to be resolved. Danny spent Monday night at his parents' house in Pennsylvania. He'd driven back to tell them in person, not wanting to deliver this kind of news over the phone. His mother had aged 15 years in the actual 15 years since Sarah disappeared. Her hair completely white now, her face lined with grief that had become part of her identity. Are you sure? Carol Mitchell asked for the 5th time, sitting on the couch in the living room that had become a shrine to Sarah. Photos covered every surface, including the age progression images that had tried to imagine what Sarah would look like at 18, at 21, at 25. None of them had gotten it quite right. The DNA is a match, Mom. It's her. She's alive. Carol pressed both hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Peter sat beside her, one arm around his wife's shoulders, his own eyes red. Why doesn't she remember us? He asked. How is that possible? The FBI thinks Garrett convinced her she's his daughter. She was so young when she was taken, 13. He had years to rewrite her memories to make her believe whatever story he told her. What kind of monster does that? Carol's voice broke. What kind of person steals a child and makes her forget her own family? Danny didn't have an answer. He'd been asking himself the same question for days, trying to understand the psychology of someone who could orchestrate something so cruel and maintain it for so long. Thomas Garrett had kept Sarah hidden in plain sight, giving her a life that looked normal on the surface while ensuring she remained isolated from anyone who might recognize her or trigger her real memories. When can we see her? Peter asked. The FBI has to process everything first. They need official DNA confirmation and they need to interview Garrett. If everything goes according to plan, maybe by the end of the week. If? Carol looked up sharply. What do you mean, if? Danny exchanged glances with Chen, who'd driven up with him. There are complications, the retired detective said gently. Sarah, Rachel, doesn't know who she really is. When Danny spoke to her, she denied everything. The FBI is worried about how she'll react when she learns the truth. She's our daughter, Carol said fiercely. She'll remember. Once she sees us, once she's away from that man, she'll remember everything. But Danny wasn't so sure. He'd seen Rachel's face when he showed her the photo. He'd seen fear, yes, but also something else. Resistance. A refusal to accept what her own eyes were telling her. 15 years was a long time to build a new identity. What if Sarah Mitchell was so deeply buried that Rachel Garrett couldn't, or wouldn't, let her resurface? Tuesday morning arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain. Danny had returned to Millfield despite Torres's orders to stay away, unable to help himself. He parked 4 blocks from Maple Ridge Drive, far enough that he wouldn't be seen but close enough that he felt connected to what was happening. At 2:30 p.m., an unmarked sedan pulled up to 2156. Torres and a local officer got out, both in plain clothes, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. They walked to the front door and knocked. Danny watched through binoculars from his distant vantage point, his hands shaking. He saw the door open. Saw Rachel standing there in jeans and a gray sweater. She must have been off work today. Saw her expression shift from polite confusion to something more guarded as Torres showed her credentials. The conversation at the door lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then Rachel stepped back and let them inside. The door closed. Danny waited. 20 minutes, 30, 45. His imagination supplied 1,000 scenarios, each worse than the last. What if Garrett had weapons? What if he did something desperate? What if Rachel refused to cooperate and they couldn't proceed without a warrant? At 3:47 p.m., Thomas Garrett's red truck pulled into the driveway. He got out, noticed the unfamiliar sedan, and his entire body language changed. Where before he'd moved with the easy confidence of a man arriving home after work, now he approached the house with visible tension. He didn't go to the front door. Instead, he walked around to the side, trying to look through windows. Danny's phone rang. Torres. We have a situation. Garrett just arrived and he's not coming inside. He's trying to see what's happening through the windows. We're going to have to confront him outside. Is Rachel okay? She's shaken but cooperative. We've explained our concerns about her identity documents, and she's agreed to a DNA test. But Danny, there's something else. She started having a panic attack when we mentioned the name Sarah Mitchell. Like the name itself triggered something. We had to calm her down before we could continue. That's good, right? It means she remembers something. Or it means the name is associated with trauma. We don't know yet. Look, I have to go. Garrett's heading to the front door now. The line went dead. Danny watched through his binoculars as Thomas reached the front entrance and pushed it open without knocking. From his distant position, Danny couldn't hear what was said, but he could see body language. Torres and the local officer emerged, followed by Rachel, who looked pale and frightened. Thomas immediately moved to her side, putting himself between her and the authorities. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. Danny could see it escalating. Thomas's gestures becoming more aggressive, Torres maintaining a calm but firm posture. Rachel standing slightly behind Thomas like she was using him as a shield. Finally, Thomas seemed to agree to something. He nodded, said a few more words, and then everyone separated. Torres and the officer returned to their car. Thomas and Rachel went back inside. Torres called again as she drove away. We've got consent for DNA testing from both of them. Thomas insisted on being present when Rachel gave her sample, which we allowed because forcing the issue would have required a warrant we don't have yet. But we've got what we need. The lab is running it now on an expedited basis. We should have preliminary results by tomorrow afternoon. What did he say? Garrett. He claims Rachel is his biological daughter, that her mother died when she was young, and that all her documentation is legitimate. He says you're either confused or running some kind of scam. He was very convincing, Danny. If we didn't have the evidence we have, I might have believed him. Did Rachel say anything? Not much. She let Thomas do most of the talking. But when I asked her directly if she had any memories of Pennsylvania, of a family named Mitchell, she said no. She said she's lived in West Virginia her whole life, that Thomas is her father, and that she doesn't know who you are. Torres paused, but her hands were shaking the entire time, and when Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, she flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. That night, Danny couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that flinch, about what it meant. Was Rachel afraid of Thomas? Or was she just overwhelmed by strangers asking impossible questions about an identity she didn't remember? The DNA results came back Wednesday at 3:15 p.m. Danny was at the police station with Chen when Torres received the call. He watched her face as she listened, saw the moment her expression shifted from neutral professionalism to grim satisfaction. It's a match, she said after hanging up. Rachel Garrett is genetically Sarah Mitchell. 99.9% certainty. We've got her. What happens now? Danny asked. Now we arrest Thomas Garrett for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, identity fraud, and about 6 other charges. We're getting the warrant now. We'll execute it tonight. Can I see her? Can I talk to Sarah? Torres shook her head. Not yet. She's a victim, but she's also a witness. We need to interview her formally, and we need to do it without family present, so there's no question of coaching or influence. I know that's hard to hear, but it's procedure. She's been gone for 15 years. My parents. We'll see her soon, I promise. But we have to do this right. If we screw up the legal process, Garrett could walk on a technicality. You don't want that, do you? Of course he didn't. But waiting another day, another hour, felt impossible when Sarah was so close. The arrest happened at 9:47 p.m. 6 FBI agents and 4 local officers converged on 2156 Maple Ridge Drive with a warrant. Danny watched from his car as they knocked on the door, announced themselves, and entered when Thomas Garrett answered. Through the windows, Danny could see shapes moving, hear raised voices. Then Thomas emerged in handcuffs, his face red with rage, shouting something Danny couldn't make out. Rachel appeared in the doorway, held back by a female agent. Even from a distance, Danny could see she was crying. She reached toward Thomas as they loaded him into a patrol car, her mouth forming words Danny couldn't hear but could guess. Dad. Don't take my dad. After Thomas was gone, Torres spent 2 hours inside the house with Rachel. When she finally emerged, she walked directly to Danny's car. We need to talk. They went back to the police station, to the same conference room where this had all been planned. Torres looked exhausted. This is going to be harder than we thought, she said. Rachel is insisting that Thomas is her father, that he's never hurt her, that this is all a terrible mistake. She's refusing to accept that she might be Sarah Mitchell. But the DNA... She says there must be an error. She says she doesn't remember anything about Pennsylvania or a family named Mitchell. She says her earliest memories are of living in Beckley with Thomas when she was about 7 years old. Everything before that is blank. 7 years old? Danny did the math. She was taken at 13. She's talking about missing 6 years of her life and acting like that's normal? Trauma can cause memory loss, or... Torres hesitated. Thomas could have used drugs, psychological manipulation, isolation. We've seen cases where long-term captives develop something like Stockholm Syndrome, where they identify with their captor and defend them even after rescue. Rachel might genuinely believe Thomas is her father, because that's the only reality she's been allowed to have. So what do? We keep her in protective custody for now. We've arranged for her to stay at a crisis center, where she'll have access to counselors who specialize in trauma and recovered memories. We continue interviewing Thomas. He's not talking right now, as a lawyer, but we've got enough evidence to hold him, and we start the process of reintroducing Rachel to her real family. Slowly, carefully. How long? I don't know, Danny. As long as it takes. The first meeting between Sarah and her parents happened on Friday afternoon in a neutral location, a family counseling center in Pittsburgh that specialized in reunification cases. Carol and Peter Mitchell arrived early, both dressed carefully as if for church, both looking terrified. Danny came with them, though Torres had warned he might not be allowed in the room initially. She's fragile right now, the counselor, Dr. Patricia Monroe, explained in the waiting room. She's been told that DNA evidence proves she's Sarah Mitchell, but she's not accepting it emotionally. She's grieving what she thinks is a false accusation against her father. We need to move slowly. Let her process things at her own pace. We've waited 15 years, Carol said, her voice tight. How much slower can we possibly go? Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your frustration, but if we push too hard, we could cause Rachel, Sarah, to retreat further into denial. The mind protects itself from truths that are too painful to accept all at once. They waited for 30 minutes. Then Dr. Monroe returned. She's agreed to meet you, but she's asked that Danny not be present for the first meeting. She says he frightened her when he came to her house and she's not ready to face him yet. Danny felt like he'd been punched. I'm her brother, and she'll remember that eventually. But right now, to her, you're a stranger who disrupted her life. Please, Mr. Mitchell, let's not make this harder than it has to be. So Danny waited in the lobby while his parents went into the counseling room, where Sarah, Rachel, whoever she was now, sat waiting. He pressed his hands against his knees to stop them from shaking and stared at the clock on the wall as minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 20 minutes later, The door opened. Carol came out first, tears streaming down her face, Peter right behind her looking shattered. Neither of them could speak. They just stood there in the lobby, holding each other and crying. Dr. Monroe appeared in the doorway. "Danny, she wants to see you now." His heart lurched. He stood on legs that didn't feel entirely solid and walked into the counseling room. She was sitting on a couch by the window wearing jeans and a green sweater, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes, those same green eyes he'd known his entire childhood, were red from crying. "Hi," Danny said, because what else could he say? "They showed me pictures," she said softly. "From when I was little. Baby pictures, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. And She pressed her hands to her face. "I don't remember any of it. I look at these photos of this little girl, and they tell me it's me, and I don't remember being her." Danny sat down across from her, careful to maintain distance, not wanting to crowd her. "What do you remember? Your earliest memory?" "I was maybe 7, living in a house in Beckley. Thomas, my dad, he was teaching me to ride a bike. I remember falling and scraping my knee, and he carried me inside and put a bandage on it. He told me I was brave. That's my first memory." "Nothing before that?" She shook her head. "He said my mother died when I was very young. Car accident. He said I was traumatized by it. That's why I didn't remember much from before." "Sarah," Danny caught himself. "Rachel, can I tell you something about my sister? The real Sarah?" She nodded slowly. She had this laugh, this very specific laugh that would start normal and then break in the middle, almost like a hiccup. "I heard that laugh on the phone 2 weeks ago, coming from a call center in Millfield, West Virginia. That's how I found you. That's how I knew." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "I don't." And she had a scar on her chin from falling off her bike when she was 9. Right here. He touched his own chin, indicating the spot. Rachel's hand rose unconsciously to her chin, touching the small scar there. "Thomas said I got that when I was learning to ride when I was 7. Did you, or did he just tell you that's what happened?" Her hand dropped. She was trembling now. "I don't know. I don't know what's real anymore. I know this is terrifying. I can't imagine what you're going through. But Sarah, you have a family who never stopped looking for you. Parents who love you. A brother who..." His voice cracked. "A brother who blamed himself every single day for not walking home with you that afternoon. We thought you were dead. We mourned you. And now you're here. You're alive, and all we want is for you to come home." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "This is my home. Millfield is my home. Thomas is my family. Thomas kidnapped you. He stole 6 years of your life and made you forget who you were." "No." She stood abruptly. "No, he wouldn't do that. He's my dad. He took care of me. He loved me. He..." She stopped, something passing over her face too quickly for Danny to identify. "He what?" "Nothing. I need time. I need to think." She looked at him, and for just a moment, Danny saw his sister in her eyes. The real Sarah, buried under 15 years of lies, but still there, still fighting to surface. "Can you give me that time?" "Of course, as much as you need." But as he left the counseling center, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that time was exactly what they didn't have. Because somewhere in a cell in Millfield, Thomas Garrett was planning his defense, preparing to convince a jury that he was an innocent father falsely accused. And if Rachel, Sarah, testified on his behalf, if she stood up in court and said he'd never hurt her, that he was her real father, they could lose her all over again. The investigation into Thomas Garrett's background took 2 weeks and revealed a pattern that made Danny's blood run cold. Before moving to Beckley in 1999, Thomas had lived in Ohio under a slightly different name, Thomas Michael Garrett instead of Thomas M. Garrett. He'd been questioned but never charged in connection with another missing child case in 1997, a 9-year-old girl who disappeared from a park and was never found. There had been others too. Women he'd dated who'd filed restraining orders. A pattern of controlling behavior, of isolation tactics, of relationships that ended when the women tried to leave. Thomas Garrett was a predator who'd been operating for decades, and Sarah, 13-year-old Sarah Mitchell from Pennsylvania, had been his greatest success. The trial was set for April 2015, 5 months after his arrest. The prosecution had DNA evidence, witness statements, documentary proof that Rachel Garrett's identity had been fabricated. What they didn't have was Sarah's testimony. She was cooperating with investigators, attending therapy sessions, slowly beginning to recover fragments of memory. But she wasn't ready to testify against the man she'd believed was her father for 15 years. 3 months into therapy, Dr. Monroe called Danny with an update. She's starting to remember little things, a song her mother used to sing, the name of her elementary school, the layout of your house in Millbrook. The memories are coming back in pieces like a puzzle reassembling itself. Is she? How is she handling it? Some days better than others. There's a lot of grief. She's mourning the life she thought she had while simultaneously grieving the life she lost. It's complicated and painful, and there's no shortcut through it. Can I see her? She's asked to see you, actually, this weekend if you're available. They met at a park this time, neutral ground where Sarah could feel safe. She was waiting on a bench when Danny arrived, wearing a jacket against the March cold. She looked different somehow, more present, more connected to the world around her. "Hi, Danny," she said, and hearing her use his name, really use it, with recognition and familiarity, made his throat tight. "Hi. I remembered something yesterday. Your 10th birthday party. Mom made this elaborate pirate cake, and you were so excited you knocked it off the table before we could sing happy birthday. You cried, and I told you it was okay. That cake tastes the same off the floor as off the plate." She smiled slightly. "You laughed. I made you laugh." Danny remembered. He remembered that birthday, remembered Sarah's joke that had saved the day. "You always knew how to make me feel better. I'm starting to remember a lot of things. Not everything. Some days it's like trying to see through fog. But the fog is lifting." She paused. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first. I'm sorry I defended him. You don't have to apologize. You were surviving the only way you knew how. The trial is in 2 weeks. They want me to testify. The prosecutor says my testimony could make the difference between conviction and acquittal." She looked at him. "I don't know if I can face him. I don't know if I can sit in a courtroom and talk about what he did when part of me still..." She stopped, struggling with words. "Still loves him? Still remembers him tucking me in at night, reading me stories, teaching me to drive. 15 years of memories that feel real, even though I know now they were built on a lie. That's what makes him so dangerous. He didn't just kidnap you, he made you need him." Sarah nodded slowly. "I'm going to testify. I'm terrified, but I'm going to do it. Because there were probably other girls. Before me, maybe after me if he hadn't been caught. And because somewhere in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, there's a little girl in photos who deserves justice. She deserves to have her voice heard." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Thomas Garrett sat in the defendant's chair wearing a suit, looking like any other middle-aged man, showing no remorse and no emotion. His lawyer tried to paint him as a devoted father caught in a terrible misunderstanding, suggested that Sarah had run away from home and Thomas had taken her in, that the DNA evidence was somehow flawed or misinterpreted. But the prosecution had too much evidence. They had the timeline proving Rachel Garrett didn't exist before 2005. They had the missing persons report from 1999. They had DNA proving Rachel and Sarah were the same person. And finally, they had Sarah herself. She took the stand on a Tuesday morning in April, wearing a blue dress that Carol had helped her pick out. She looked pale but determined. For 2 hours, she answered questions about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about the day she disappeared, about her 15 years with Thomas Garrett. Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. She told the truth even when it hurt. When the prosecutor asked her directly, Did Thomas Garrett kidnap you? Sarah looked across the courtroom at the man who'd stolen her childhood. Yes, she said clearly. He took me, and he made me forget who I was, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to recover what he stole. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Thomas Garrett guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison without possibility of parole. Sarah Mitchell, because she'd legally reclaimed her name, sat between her parents and her brother in the courtroom when the verdict was read. When it was over, when Thomas was led away in handcuffs, she finally allowed herself to cry. Carol held her on one side, Peter on the other, and Danny put his hand on her shoulder. Together. Finally together. The recovery didn't end with the trial. Sarah continued therapy, continued the slow process of rebuilding her identity and her relationships. Some days were harder than others. Some memories never fully returned. But gradually, painfully, she found her way back to being Sarah Mitchell. Not the 13-year-old girl who'd disappeared, but the 28-year-old woman who'd survived. A year after the trial, on October 14, 2015, 16 years to the day after Sarah's disappearance, the family gathered at their house in Millbrook. Not the old house on Oakwood Street. They'd sold that years ago, unable to live with those memories. But a new house in a different neighborhood where they could build new memories together. Sarah stood in the kitchen helping Carol make dinner, and Danny watched from the doorway. She was laughing at something their mother said, that distinctive laugh that broke in the middle, and for a moment, it was like she'd never left, like those 15 years had never happened. But they had happened. The scars were real, visible in the way Sarah sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds, in the nightmares she still occasionally had, in the gaps in her memory that would never completely fill. Thomas Garrett had stolen something irreplaceable and no prison sentence could give it back. But he hadn't won. Sarah was home. She was herself again, or a version of herself, shaped by trauma but not defined by it. She was rebuilding relationships with her family, making new friends, considering going back to school. She was living. "Hey," Sarah said, noticing Danny in the doorway. "You just going to stand there or are you going to help?" "I'm supervising," he said with a smile. "You're useless, is what you are." But she was grinning, that crooked smile he'd thought he'd never see again. Later that evening after dinner, Sarah pulled Danny aside on the back porch. The October air was cool, the trees already changing colors the way they did every year, eternal and unchanging even when everything else fell apart. "I never thanked you," she said, "for not giving up, for finding me when everyone else had stopped looking. I'm your brother. Of course I didn't give up." That laugh on the phone, if you hadn't recognized it, if you hadn't followed that thread, I'd still be Rachel Garrett. I'd still be living a lie. You gave me my life back. Danny shook his head. You did that yourself. You chose to remember. You chose to come home. We did it together. She squeezed his hand. That's what families do, right? We save each other. Inside, through the kitchen window, Danny could see their parents setting out dessert. A normal evening. A normal family dinner. It was something he'd thought he'd never have again. His family complete together. The road ahead was still long. Sarah had years of therapy ahead of her. Legal battles over her identity documents, the challenge of reclaiming a life that had been stolen. But she wasn't facing it alone. She had her family. She had people who loved her, who'd never stopped loving her, even when she'd forgotten they existed. And she had time. After 15 years in the dark, Sarah Mitchell finally had time to heal, to grow, to become whoever she wanted to be. The little girl who disappeared on an October afternoon in 1999 was gone forever, lost to Thomas Garrett's cruelty. But the woman who'd survived, who'd found her way back against impossible odds, was standing right here. Damaged, yes. Changed, certainly. But alive. And alive, Danny thought, was everything.